Okay. Well, I don't really know how to start, but
Welcome to this episode of the Upfront Podcast. As always, I am your host, Nina Mueller, and this is the place where you get your dose of upfront and honest conversations with people from all around the world. Enjoy the show. Hi, everyone. Now, this episode hits a bit differently. I am speaking with Patrick Jones from the That Gives Me Anxiety podcast. On this episode, we discuss dealing with expectations of hosting a podcast, our own mental health journeys, conspiracy theories, death, politics, and other fun stuff.
thank you so much for inviting me to chat with you today to talk about our podcast and anxiety related to creating and putting yourself out there.
Yeah, of course. My pleasure. Thanks for doing this. It's really interesting to speak to another podcast host.
Yeah. And I always like talking to people outside the US, and it really gives you a worldly perspective, and it's especially a creative such as yourself. So you're joining us from Switzerland, but you currently also live in Tel Aviv.
Exactly.
That's awesome. So cool. Yeah, I've talked to people through my podcast of people in like New Zealand and Brazil and Australia and other parts of Europe. And it's I don't know, it's just always like very cool to find a way to, and always like when I get downloads from Africa and, I'll just keep naming geographic locations, but it's just nice to it's such a medium that you can reach the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I mean, that's probably very hopeful, but yeah, I think it's great that you get to kind of speak to people all around.
Yeah. Well, tell me a little bit more about your podcast. I'm curious to learn about a bit more what you do.
Yeah, sure. So I originally started about half a year ago. Yeah, well, a bit more, end of last year. And it was really just to sort of kind of create a sense of community for other people as well. And because I had really noticed that like a lot of people, like during the pandemic that really started when it was like the lockdowns and lockdown after another, I kind of noticed online that a lot of people do share similar values and like beliefs and all that. And that everybody sort of has their like backstory, their sort of personal baggage. And yeah, that I think that it kind of helps to feel less alone, I guess, in like things that you're like advocating for, or things that you're sort of pursuing or whatever. And yeah, so that's how I really like wanted to do, have sort of not an influence, but maybe have a little bit of an impact on people and really like raise awareness and highlight topics that are really not like talked about enough, I think, personally. From what I hear, or like also only within like my own bubble of people.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. It may be a big deal in like your circle of friends, but expanding that is a big deal. So what are some topics that you discuss?
Pretty much anything that needs more awareness. So anything ranging from like mental health awareness, disability, intersectionality, LGBTQ issues, feminism, patriarchy, politics, even sometimes. So yeah, all kinds of different topics, really.
I love that. That's so fun. Yeah. To be able to even learn something, right? To discuss and have an expert on to help educate you.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's just so fun to talk to people. I'm always excited and kind of tickled by people who are like, okay, to come on and sort of teach me about their expertise. I had recently, the episode hasn't come out, but a person on who talked about how people accept conspiracy theories, right? Like they're all out there and like, who is the type of person that accepts conspiracy theories and runs with them? And it was just so interesting to think about the psychology of something that can cause such danger, right? I mean, there's conspiracy theories all over the world. And so it's like very important to learn about why or who people are that are at risk, and what we can do to potentially help educate those people. So it's just, every time I get an expert on, I'm always thrilled. And so I'm the same as you. It just, in terms of, I felt like there wasn't a lot out there about mental health. And so I've set out to create what I wish was already out there, right? To be able to hear people's stories, exactly like you were saying. I mean, there's such a power in that. And it just helps you feel not so alone, and also allows you to kind of laugh at yourself a little bit, right? It's helped change my perspective on my own mental health. And that's really what I hope people get from listening to this.
Yeah, that's great. And I think it's very admirable as well.
Thank you.
Like, not speaking to myself, but like to you. Really,
we can pat ourselves on the back here.
But, I think it's great because potentially you could reach people. Maybe, I don't know, maybe that's like wishful thinking, but I think maybe you could reach people that you would otherwise not get to like talk to or educate in a way that just raises awareness, and that's like thought provoking, and they might talk to other people about it and all that stuff. So,
and they may not be ready to admit certain things to their friends, and like a podcast is an easy way to dip your toes in to see what therapy might be like, or whatever. So you let you know what other options are out there.
Right. Yeah. So you said that you wanted to really focus on mental health, right? Which is kind of also comes through like with your podcast title, I guess.
Yeah.
What was your like mental health journey like? Has that also changed with like doing the podcast? Or
it's my mental health as I mean, I've learned so much. I've interviewed so many therapists. I mean, not that I'm a professional in any way, but it's a way of it's a form of therapy to sort of be suggesting, and I inject like stories from my life of, I've dealt with a lot of anxiety and depression, and posing that in a sort of informal manner to mental health professionals is definitely a form of therapy. And, the first, I feel like 31 years of my life, it was just sort of like, you've never had an emotion, you stuff that down, right? Like you swallow that emotion. And I came to a realization sort of around that time. I'm 35 now, about to be 36. And so I started realizing that wasn't going to serve me, right? It was by like swallowing your emotions. It comes out in other forms, right? It comes out in drinking or drugs or anger issues, right? It's sort of like a poison that needs to be expressed in some way. So it's been an interesting journey. I'm sort of like learning as I go and improving. Just long answer, but from where I was to where I am now, it's much better. And if anyone's listening and they're just getting started, I hear you, I see you. And it does get better just by being open and taking your time and considering your feelings and your emotions and expressing them. So I hope that answers that. That was sort of like a little mini rant. But
no, that was really good. And I do hope and think that it might help people to hear like all kinds of genders as well speak about mental health, because I think especially for men, cisgender men, there's a lot of like stigma around talking about emotions. So in that respect, I congratulate you on
Thank
doing
you.
this.
Thank you. Yeah. I remember growing up, like my grandpa, there was like a cousin that was like crying or something. And like my grandpa was like, go get a hockey stick. It was just like,
oh God.
It's just completely outdated, right? It's just, men. I mean, I would say that if men took their mental health seriously, we'd have a lot less problems in this world. I feel like a lot of these things could be attributed to men just not able to express themselves. And so they bottle it up and they get crazy and it's just not good for them or the world.
Yeah, definitely. And you can also feel like the impact of feelings being bottled up or disorders maybe not being addressed in politics, I think.
Oh
especially
my
now.
goodness. Yeah.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Oh man. I mean, politics alone is a crazy subject. I mean, I honestly, I don't
Mm.
know much about Swiss politics or Israel politics. I mean, other than the obvious,
Mm.
Palestinian issues. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's exhausting to be an American these days. It's just
Mm.
everyone is nuts. Everyone has lost their mind.
Yeah, but I feel like that's sort of the common feeling a bit all around, kind of.
Hmm. Well, it's good to know
And
that no one is happy, right?
yeah, exactly. That makes you feel better too.
Yeah, exactly
Yeah.
right. Everyone's
Mm.
crazy all over the world, and
Yeah.
oh man. But what about you? What has your mental health journey been like? Has your podcast been helpful in that? I mean, if you're especially if you're living in a podcast where you're discussing heavier topics, I'd imagine that weighs
Mm.
on you from time to time.
Well, yeah, some of it does, but then I just like take a break afterwards and then I'm kind of good with it. Like I've always been a very reflective person, even as like a
Mm,
teenager and stuff, even though I was going through like difficult phases of like, taking too many risks and stuff like that, typical teenage stuff.
mhm,
But I've always been like very reflective and I had been journaling when I was a teenager. I no longer do that just because I feel like I'd rather just like think about things instead of like writing them down because
mhm.
it's just too much to write down, kind of.
Yeah, if it feels like a
Um,
chore,
yeah,
it
yeah. But
defeats the
I know
purpose.
that like a lot of people do find like a lot of value in that. So
Mhm,
yeah, for some people, I think it's a great tool to help. But yeah, really, I just try to talk to people who are like-minded, and also it helps for me personally to like block out sort of anything that is really like that really goes against my values in terms of like social media and Instagram and all that, and really kind of surround myself in private life with like people who are kind of like-minded, so I feel like I'm not alone in like being active or advocating for a certain topic and stuff. So that really helps.
mhm.
Yeah.
Good for you. Yeah, I have gone back and forth on the balance of making sure I'm not in a bubble, of making sure I'm
Yeah.
reading and listening to alternative thought processes, just because I get nervous about being sliding too far, especially the way like
Mm.
there's so much media out there that is intended to sway your opinion. So I try to
Mm-hmm.
at least experience things outside of my bubble, but every time I do that, it's
You just
stress
get angry.
inducing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you get angry,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it
Mm-hmm.
just becomes overwhelming, and you begin to think that, oh man, the world's never going to change, right? Like you begin to feel like the sky is falling. So yeah, I keep having to like run in and like, but like the tide, just sort of
Mm-hmm.
get some information and then like come back, and just because
Mm-hmm.
it's like it's scary over there, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and go back into your like safe space, I
Yeah,
guess. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
that's like sort of a harmony I feel like a lot of people struggle with, especially here
Mm-hmm.
since 2015, since the 2016 election. um like everything just went up a notch,
Mm-hmm.
and if you watch the news too much, I think it's clear who watches the news too much, right? It's just, you see people like it wears on their face, right? And they're quick to anger, and yeah, so I don't know. I always encourage people to try to experience some things out of their bubble, but also protect themselves, like you're describing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but actually, when you bring up the election, I listened to, I can't remember what podcast it was, but they were speaking about, I'm not sure whether I'm pronouncing this correctly, Raj Limbaugh.
Rush Limbaugh.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I had to go into a few episodes and just kind of get a taste of what he talks about and
Oh
like
God.
the way, yeah. So that was pretty extreme. So I'm never going to do that again. But yeah, it was good to like know kind of what the other side is doing, not in sort of a combative kind of way, but more to like be aware of what is
Mm-hmm.
happening on like the extreme other side, kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm.
it's good to. Oh man, I cringed a little bit when I heard you describing
Yeah.
it's just, I'm sorry. I don't know exactly what you heard, but I know the essence
Mm.
of it. And it's just like that man was a piece of trash. Yeah.
I think it was originally a Canadian sort of investigative podcast that sort of uncovered those, yeah, as you said, conspiracy theories and how it gets to like such an event as like the Capitol storming or barricade, whatever you want to call it, and how that like sort of developed over time without people really noticing what was going on as much. So yeah,
Right.
that was interesting, but also a bit much. Yeah. So
Yeah. Yeah. My goodness. I'm curious about like one thing that comes up for me a lot is I'm not a mental health professional. I'm a journalist by trade. Like I've been a journalist for 10, 12 years at this point. And so, but one thing that I do struggle with at times is putting myself out there in this way and creating, it's a roller coaster of things aren't getting downloads or views, but also you're really putting yourself out there, right? I'm sharing my face sometimes. I mean, we're not going to for this one. But how do you handle the roller coaster of being a creative and putting content out there, especially for the subject nature that you enjoy discussing?
It's kind of difficult to answer because it really depends on the topic. Also, I try not to be too exclusive of only covering topics that I'm interested in, sort of like personally. I'm trying to like cover a broad range of things that need to be like talked about more. But then also, of course, it does kind of reflect a lot of the values that I share. The one thing that I do find a bit difficult at times is handling expectations, really, not like the actual act of recording a podcast or inviting people or whatever it is, but really like handling the expectation of how is that person going to respond? Is that going to be in line with the message I want to be like sort of brought across? Or are they completely going to like derail my line of questioning or something like that, but obviously it usually ends up being, apart from like one podcast guest, I think so far, it usually ends up being pretty much aligning with like my own beliefs, kind of, at least at the very core of it. So yeah. What about you? How do you, sorry.
No, yeah. How did that guest derail you? This person was just sort of, I'm curious what happened.
Yeah. So that was one of the very early episodes. I had thought originally that they did really good like work in trying to kind of get together Arabs and Jews in Israel to sort of like do stuff combined, like activities like, I don't know, hiking and all that. But then it really became political in a sense where I was like, okay, it's getting political. That's fine. Obviously, that sort of kind of has to come up because it's kind of the subject matter. But then we had very, very different opinions, which is also fine because I think a good conversation doesn't necessarily have to be, two people of the same values and beliefs and everything. But it was a bit to me personally was a bit riddled with like a bit hateful comments and stuff like that. So I tried to, edit it down. I always have to edit down episodes, but I tried to like edit it down a bit more to be less hateful. Just so it's more like listenable in a sense. But yeah, that was a bit tricky. The thing is also, I don't want to like delete stuff out or like cut anything out that kind of like changes their message or their opinion, because that would be kind of like part of cancel culture or whatever you want to call it, and freedom of speech would be not granted in that sense. So yeah, I tried to like keep that opinion of that person in as much as possible without being too derogatory or anything like that.
Right. Oh man. Yeah. That's a tough balance to like, this person is an adult who chose their words and, but also you don't want to give them a platform to get all that vitriol, I guess, out into the world.
Yeah, because I thought it was going to be more of a solution focused conversation and a discussion about like the, I don't know, stereotypes that there are, how we can try to like dissolve those stereotypes and kind of come up with like solutions to conflict, or at least like within the population, less in like political levels. But that's what it is.
C'est la vie, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. What about you? How do you sort of like deal with like expectations for yourself or your guests, or how a podcast is going to do?
So I used to have jobs where if your news organizations and the stories that I was telling, if they didn't hit certain quotas in terms of views on whatever platform the video or news story was supposed to go on, like you would be reprimanded, you would get in trouble, right? And it's like, even though everyone agreed upon the story being worthwhile and telling the story in a factual basis and not, going the clickbait route, you would be reprimanded, which created this such a stressful environment for everyone working there. But that's sort of how a lot of online news companies stay afloat, is through making sure that they're getting clicks. And that just boils down to the reporters and storytellers themselves meeting certain expectations. So I'm thankfully not at those jobs right now, which has been a lot better for my mental health, but that's still in the back of my mind, right? If something is not performing the way I expected it to, it does trigger a little of that old feeling. But then I remind myself that this is a passion project. This is something that I want to be doing, that I'm, not making really any money, like very little from here to there. But the reason why I'm doing it is because I enjoy it. I love meeting new people and having real conversations. I prefer to have real conversations versus, a lot of small talk. And so it's like working out my brain, if you think of your brain as a muscle, in that regard. And so really I just remind myself that I enjoy doing this. So at the end of the day, that's really nice. And my fiance does all of my like artwork and stuff like that, and helps give creative input on the social channels and stuff like that. And so it's something fun for her and I to work on creatively, which is always really like, I love hearing her opinion, because we're sort of a yin and yang. I'm more of a, let's just like turn the cameras on, we'll figure it out. And she's like more of the, no, let's plan everything. So it's good that she pulls me back a little bit, where otherwise I'd just be like, let's just get out there and try and fail, and we'll hone it over time, It's just
yeah, but I guess that's also good for like the relationship itself, right? That you have something like other than within the relationship to sort of work on, they can do together.
Absolutely. Yeah. I always think it's nice for people in romantic relationships to have projects. It's like a team building exercise, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. So what is like most important for you in a guest for your podcast? What would you say?
That they tell the truth, that they bring their honest. I think there's only one way to be wrong with my podcasts, and that is to be making things up. We're talking about things that are scary, and that can be funny, that could be sad, it can run the full spectrum of emotion, and it could be more than one emotion. But the only thing is that I just need people who are, I can handle and help people who feel shy. I've had that. I just take the lead a little bit and sort of speak a little bit, but I'm also perfectly okay with asking one question and just sitting back. And if the person is going, I sort of just let them finish until they reach a conclusion. But that's the most important thing, is just that factual, to the best of your knowledge, right? If it's an expert, it's to the best of your knowledge kind of thing, and just being open and honest, because I'm very interested in not only getting the information that a guest has, but also finding out a little bit about who they are, right? I think people are very interesting, and I'm working to sort of pull their personality out, like give them a platform to share their knowledge and themselves. So yeah, that's really what I'm looking for. I mean, because some of my episodes are serious and some of them are silly. Some people, it's just, the guest that's right for a particular subject matter varies.
Yeah, sure.
Do you find that something similar with your podcast, or is that I'd imagine somewhat close?
Yeah, I would say it really depends on the topic and then that person speaking on it, really. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So all people are kinds of like very different people, very different backgrounds. And so that makes it really interesting to me as well, just to hear their story, really. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I also had another podcast called Death Space Filling the Void. It's a podcast that talk about grief and death. And I started that during the pandemic. I pick it up every once in a while. But it began during the pandemic. There was I lived in New York, right, where at one point it was like the epicenter, and they were bringing in the refrigerator trucks because there weren't enough spaces to put the dead bodies. And just people were crying in the streets, and they couldn't hold wakes and stuff. And it was just like completely overwhelming. And just feeling crushed by that moment, I started that podcast to just talk about grief, because I didn't feel, stemming back from also when people who have been close to me have died, I just didn't feel like I had the emotional tools to handle it. And especially in this mass death period, it was just so overwhelming. And that one I have had to put on the side because it becomes too much, because I'm really asking people to tell me about people they've lost or ways that they've been able to handle grief. And it's just so heavy. Like even describing it now, I feel like I have like a weighted blanket on my shoulders. It's just, it's a lot, but I think it's something that's important for the world. Just, I mean, not that podcast specifically, but the idea of talking about death, because I feel like we don't.
Yeah. Actually, I think you brought up a really interesting topic that sort of refers to an observation that I recently made. Is I actually spoke to my mom about it. When people sometimes listen or read about like tragedies that involve like death or whatever it is, fatal tragedies, that she actually observed, and I kind of like tried to sort of research that for myself and try to like talk to people about like what their reactions are when they read about tragedies and stuff like that. And I do agree with her that it might be just because it reminds us of our finite life as well, of like that it's not going on forever. It's not eternal. And that is like sort of what kind of triggers them a lot of times, unless you're personally involved, of course, unless you know the person, whatever. But
I did an episode with a psychologist who studies that. I forget his team works off of the work of an older psychologist. I forget, I'm spacing on the name, but basically the idea is that this psychologist had the notion that once you're reminded that you're going to die, you tend to cling to people in your perceived group. So, for example, Christians would become, they're reminded that they're going to die. They cling more and see in a brighter light, like other Christians. And also everyone else is a perceived quote unquote other. And so this is potentially like a explanation for violence throughout history, throughout the entire world, of really a fear of death could be at the core of a lot of violence between groups, that people recognize the finite aspect of their lives, and that frightens them to their core, that they shudder in and block any other perspective. Yeah, I can send you that episode, because it's and you may even want to interview the professor that I interviewed, because it sounds like it would be right up your alley, but it's terrifying and fascinating. Those are two words that are concerning, but when put together. But yeah.
Yeah, I also feel like that might be the reason behind why people are fascinated and scared by true crime at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Like the true crime community, especially on podcasts, has grown immensely, like over the
Mm-hmm.
past, I'd say like past 2.5, 3 years. So really during like the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that has to do with like the fascination at the same time with like being scared. And one professor on a podcast about true crime, he tried to find an explanation for the fascination with like crime cases that are horrific. Sometimes you can kind of put it aside because it's not as graphic or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Some touch you more and some are like less intense, I guess. But he actually said that it might be like his observation is probably, and his conclusion is that it has to do with being sort of prepared for our own death. And maybe like even be prepared in case something happens to us of that like true crime nature. Yeah, so that I found that very interesting.
That is, it's sort of like you're trying on a pair of pants at a store, right? to
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
run through the practice of what it might be
Mm-hmm.
like. Yeah, that is interesting. Are you a big true crime fan or no?
Actually, I am. That's why I really had to listen to that
Nice.
professor episode, what he said about it, because I was like, it's kind of morbid. It's kind of weird. Why am I like so drawn to these stories? Because yeah, listening to those for hours and hours on end, yeah, it's kind of weird actually when you think about it.
If you
Because
really think
a
about
lot
it.
of it like involves like really tragic stories. It's like not light entertainment, right?
No,
So,
not at all. What are your favorite true crime shows?
oh, definitely True Crime and Cocktails. Have you heard of them?
No, I haven't heard of them. I'll have to check them out.
Yeah, absolutely. Australian true crime is also really good.
Mhm.
Bailey Sarian does a really funny job with it, and she
Mhm.
kind of puts it in a way that is like more easily digestible, which is also kind of weird that we're having to have more easily digestible true crime content,
Yeah,
because that would mean why would you even have to listen to it if it's not easily digestible, right?
right. Isn't that the whole point? Yeah, to tell the
Yeah,
story.
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
I like
Mhm.
Last Podcast on the Left. I don't know if you've ever heard of them. They also do like aliens and ghosts. And like
Mm.
it's very silly. And they do a lot of like characters. There's a lot of I like improv comedy, and so they do a lot of
Mm.
like characters and stuff like that, and make it lighter. And the whole thing being that they're usually making fun of the killer, which
Oh.
is kind of it feels good, right? To
Mm. Hmm.
belittle, uh, such awful people. Yeah.
Yeah, but then when you think about it, if they're in prison and once they get out, what happens if they find you as the podcast host of that,
Yeah.
right?
It's concerning.
A bit. Yeah, I'm not sure whether they've ever like really thought about that aspect.
There was a show on Apple TV where it's exactly that. I
Mm.
forget the name of it, but it's a true crime podcast host who this exact scenario comes up. I watched it; it was pretty good. I'll email it to you when I think of it.
Mm.
But yeah, it's kind of fun in that regard. Yeah, because it's like you
Mm.
could see it happening.
Yeah,
Unfortunately, yeah.
definitely.
So I'm curious, what where do you see your podcast going, and what do you want to see happen with it?
Well, to be honest, it's kind of a sore topic a bit because a lot of friends do ask me, "Oh, do you make a lot of money with that podcast?" And it does because it adds a lot of meaning and value to my life. But like financially, obviously, the like I'm funding it by myself. I'm editing, I'm hosting, and doing all of it. But it's really just to I hope help sort of society at large in a way, and also help people who are like my podcast guests, and in turn myself,
Mhm.
by not feeling like I'm the only one advocating for a cause or whatever. Um, but yeah, I'm really not sure like what I want to achieve with it, other than like raising awareness and like highlight sort of quote unquote important topics. Really, yeah.
Right.
What about
Yeah.
yours?
I think that's exactly the same. Where
Oh, okay.
it's like it would be amazing if one day I was able to live my whole life as this,
Mhm.
podcaster. But until then, I look at it like a bowling night, right? Or
Mm.
insert whatever activity that you like doing. It's a hobby that I take seriously and want to do well at, but really, whether I make no money or the same amount of money I'm making now, or it becomes my full-time job, it's been interesting, and it has added spice to my life, which is always nice. So, I
definitely.
mean, that's all I could really ask for. And it's just nice to be working for myself, to have a project. I've worked on a lot of different news organizations and helping build their foundation. And it's just nice to do it for myself at a much, much slower pace, but it's fun.
And I guess you also get to like choose the topics that you want to interview people on, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
That's a whole different story.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm pretty suggestible in that if anyone reaches out to me with an idea, I'll usually just try to figure it out. I mean, there's been some times that I've had to say no, unfortunately, just because it didn't seem to fit. But usually I can find a way to like mold any two ideas together, and you never know what you're going to get. Like, that's kind of like the fun part. Some of the episodes that I've done have been like, this is going to be the best one I've ever done. And it like falls flat, but like some have really just surprised me in a good way. People surprise you. It's fun.
How has your audience like reacted to like different episodes in terms of like, because for myself and my own podcast, I kind of noticed that like the episodes I like the most are usually not the most popular ones. I'm not sure whether that's like your experience as well.
Well, I did an episode on flying, and that's my most popular episode. And I kind of thought that would be the case, because there's so many people that it's a fear that exists in a lot of places, but it also feels like something you can work on, right? It's in an easier way. Like, people are just like, oh, let me listen to that to get for tips. But there's been a few episodes that have been surprising. Like, I did an episode on safety in caves, and I didn't think that would be the most popular, but it's in my top 5. I mean, people, it's just fun, I guess. I mean, I have one of the world's leading cave safety experts, and he's telling stories, I guess, about going into caves to find like meth labs and rescues and stuff. And so I guess it's just an interesting story, right? I don't know. Every week I reset my brain, and I'm like, this one's it's gonna take off. It's gonna take off. And then sometimes those expectations are met and some of them drop off. I had an episode on ghosts recently, and I thought that was going to take off, but it didn't do as well as I had hoped.
Maybe it will come after this,
Yeah.
How do you feel about like going like sort of backtracking, going back and re-recording like previous episodes? Have you ever felt the urge of doing that?
I haven't. I do feel the urge of continuing the conversation or revisiting a topic where it's like take the flying example. That's the expert there has one way of thinking. There's other people who have other ways that can help you. So it's just, maybe that one doesn't connect with you, but this other person's will. So it's not like re-recording. It's just, I view it more as continuing the conversation or offering a different vantage point. Yeah. Is that something that you probably could show all different sides of a different topic?
Yeah, certainly. But the thing is, I do kind of like catch myself thinking about like, oh, I should really like do that episode again, but then it wouldn't come out naturally. The guest would have to have the same answers, because there's sometimes like really on point, really like interesting opinions that you wouldn't expect and stuff like that. Anecdotes that they're sharing that they might not recall in the same way if they would redo it. But only really because I feel like with every episode, the podcast does get better in terms of quality, audio, how prepared I am or not, or whatever. So yeah, that's the only kind of like reason why I would go back and like do recordings again. But then I guess like progress is sort of like part of life as well. So yeah. I guess we should just leave it as it is.
Yeah, that's just what it was meant to be. I am an improv comedian, so I always think of as whatever was meant to be, it has to happen in that moment, and then the moment is gone. But yeah,
yes, and
yeah. uh, how do you feel before interviews? Do you get nervous, or how are you feeling?
That depends really, like who it is, what the topic is on. Usually I'm quite well informed kind of on all the topics I have covered so far. And if not, then I will do like some research, or I will read if it's like an author or whatever, I'll read their book beforehand, if I have enough time. But yeah, sometimes my voice gets kind of jittery, and then like after a few minutes it does get better. But like today my eyes twitching, and that's not because I'm nervous, but it's just because I haven't gotten enough sleep or something.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. No, I haven't even noticed that at all.
Oh, really? Because I thought you were like, you kept like looking at it.
Oh, no, not at all. No, all right. Sorry. I'm sorry if I made you feel that way. No, isn't that funny? Like we think that everyone can see something that we're nervous about. Like I always get nervous about, I have like dark under eyes. And I always think like, oh man, they're looking right at that. But like in reality, people aren't.
Nobody's paying attention.
No one's paying attention. Yeah. Yeah. No,
that's funny. So I was like, yeah, he's noticing it.
Yeah, right. It's all he can focus on now.
Yeah, exactly.
No,
that's sort of like, yeah, what I remembered when you said, let's do it, like the video as well, is I also thought of like, being too focused on, not in a narcissistic way necessarily, I guess, but like being too focused on like, oh, how do I look? Do I look like I'm weird? Am I like, I don't know, sitting weirdly, or like, is my eye twitching, or am I like not smiling enough? Do I look like I'm crying, or, stuff like that? So like being too focused on like appearance.
Yeah.
That's why I usually do everything like audio only. Cause I feel like people sometimes, obviously, like when you don't know them, it takes a few minutes, a few seconds, depending on who the person is and how you get along as well, like the chemistry sort of between two people. But sort of after a bit, you usually figure out like what the speech pattern is like, so you don't keep interrupting each other. But I do feel like people are sometimes a bit more open, like with audio only. Do you feel that way too, or not so much?
I like to do video because if the conversation turns serious, I like the person knowing that like I am giving them my full undivided attention, and I'm looking at them and giving them, nonverbal cues that I'm listening, and that it's striking a chord with my empathy. And so I always thought it was like helpful from that regard, that like the guest is getting all of me. I'm not doing anything else. I'm, trying to be as supportive as possible. And so yeah, that is why it started. I use the video whenever the guest is okay with it. But the main reason why I like to record is what I was just saying, that I like to beam rays of positivity and support to the guests, especially in times that they may need it, right? If they're bearing their soul, talking about something that's really been bugging them, especially with mental health, I think it's important for me as the host to be there, to be present, and to hold space. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally understand that. And I think it also is very different, like what you said about like non-verb cues that you get, like that is very different. It does help to see like body language. I guess I should sit up a bit more.
I get the Larry King.
Yeah.
I'm going to turn into a vulture here.
Yeah, but I do say it's terrible.
It's just comforting.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
I'll get a neck one day. But it's funny, like before most interviews, I just need to like lay down, turn everything off, and just prepare, because the anxiety builds of like not being sure who the guest is or what they're going to need from me. So I have to be prepared for all different scenarios. And it can be like emotionally exhausting to send exactly what I was describing before, of like all the positivity and support, and the empathy meter gets low. So I try to charge it up right before.
How long does it usually take you to like prepare for an episode recording?
I make sure I have questions, but I often deviate from them because I want to be as in the moment as possible, making sure that I'm asking follow-up questions that are piquing my curiosity. So I make sure that I know the person, right? Again, like you were saying, like if it's an author, I read their book. If there's some other medium that I need to digest, I make sure I do that. But really, I'm very quick to throw away the outline and sort of follow the road that the show kind of feels like it wants. I don't know if that sounds very hippie, but I don't know. I just sort of roll with the punches, I guess.
Yeah.
Do you throw away your questions? I mean, even though you've prepared, or do you like to? Yeah, how do you like to approach that?
In terms of like my personality type, I have a hard time like letting go of like the line of questioning like that I've prepared, but but a lot of times it does end up, and the more I do like this podcast, the more I sort of just go with, like how you said, go with the flow, like wherever it kind of leads. I do try to like circle back to like important questions that I wanted to have in there, especially if they're like experts, community leaders, and they do have like a sort of a solid opinion to share and like an important point to bring across. I do try to like get back to like having some questions answered that are like sort of crucial in my opinion to have in there.
Yeah. One thing about training for improv, it's allowed me to like keep an idea in the back of my head while talking about whatever else. It's like I didn't have the skill until I started doing it for a couple of years. And so that's been really helpful in that I like sift things back and have it just like holding there and then can bring them back up. It's been really helpful in discussing anything with people, right? It's just nice to push something back while also maintaining what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, definitely. How do you react to like, I don't know, opinions of your guests that are sort of opposite to your own?
Internally, I'm like,
question,
oh,
right?
But no, externally, if I think someone is misguided a little bit, I may offer a counterpoint. I've never had anyone be rude or try to derail or be hateful in any way. But when people have said things that I know to not be true, I've either just deleted it because I can't have things that aren't factual in video. I mean, that's very important to me. But also I'll offer a counterpoint, or sometimes I'm just like, well, why? What makes you think that? Right? It's just sometimes I want to understand why they think that way. But thankfully, most people have been really good and open, and I try to set the expectation. And if there's any time that I'm unsure, I'll do like a pre-interview the person and just sort of you're trying to get a sense of who they are and how they view the world and stuff like that. And so sometimes that's really helpful.
Right.
Yeah. We should try to interview someone at the same time. That would be fun. I think we have like somewhat similar, but also somewhat varied approaches. And it might be fun to do like a group episode. Yeah,
that'd be fun. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, let's make that happen.
Absolutely.
Well, this has been a great conversation. I think we're at like 50 minutes here. I don't know if you had any other questions you wanted to ask.
Nothing that goes in line with like the authentic course this has taken, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
Awesome. So yeah, if you're out there and you have any ideas, and send them my way.
Amazing.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. It was a real pleasure. You can find the That Gives Me Anxiety podcast on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube at That Gives Me Anxiety podcast. And his personal account is Patrick_E_Jones, to which you can also find the links in the show notes. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Upfront Podcast. Please do consider subscribing wherever you are listening right now, so you won't miss out on any new episodes. You can also follow us on Instagram and on Facebook at The Upfront Podcast and join in the conversation. See you next time.